Something foul has come to the world of Faerun, affecting even its most animalistic residents. Thankfully, a wood elf huntress raised by loyal animals has come to save the day. That means she'll use her dashing good looks to disarm enemies, her family members to disarm them in the more literal sense, and of course her sniping skills with a bow to protect all those that she can. Will it be enough to save the forests of Faerun and remove the tadpole planted in her head? We've got one way to find out, but first, the rules. No other party members, though temporary companions such as summons are of course a-okay. No multiclassing, no illithid powers, no karmic dice, no barrelmancy or chessmancy, no saving in the middle of combat, and we're playing with the honor mode rule set, so we'll be keeping it that way. With all that said, let's move on to character creation. To start off, our race is a wood half-elf, mainly for the extra 1.5 meters of move speed to help our positioning. Our background of choice is of course an outlander to go with our forest warrior vibes. The stats are supposed to end up looking like this, but unfortunately I screwed it up by choosing the class last and caused them to partially reset without noticing, so they end up more like this. Don't worry, we'll fix it as soon as we get the ability to respec. And for our class, we are naturally a ranger, picking ranger knight and beast tamer for our favorite enemy and natural explorer, giving us heavy armor proficiency as well as find familiar. Finally, we make our astounding archer look like the forest creature she is and give her a name befitting a lady of her status. And so, Astrid Fletcher, guardian of all that is green, is here to save the day. Our champion awakens on a burning nautiloid, disoriented with no animal companions in sight and a single goal in mind, to get to safety and summon our family. As soon as we get heading towards the helm, we bump into a talking brain that kind of reminds us of a cat, so we pop it out of its skull. And just like that, get us, our first of many animal companions to come, although hopefully most of them are less, disturbing. The two of us continue our journey and are quickly ambushed by a Gith warrior ready to murk us. At the same time, a group of imps also join the fray. While the fight kicks off, us starts obliterating an imp, and while she's not looking, we trip our would-be assassin into the void. Whew, that was a close one. From here, the remaining imps are easy to clean up with the combined efforts of our two adventurers. Soon after, we find ourselves in the helm properly, and without all of our animal friends, we simply do not have what it takes to deal with whatever the heck is going on in here. So instead, we run all the way to the end in order to tickle some teleporting tentacles, which brings us crashing down on a cozy little beach. The next morning, we wake up once again alone, but this time ready to start our journey properly. Starting of course by scavenging the first hat that we see, since every forest dweller knows to not waste what you find laying about. Then our raven familiar bumps into some intellect devourers the hard way, leaving us to blow up one of them with a flaming bolt to a nautiloid tank, and the other goes down to just a single crossbow bolt, getting us our first level up and the ability to cast spells, for which we choose Hunter's Mark and Longstrider for both more damage and more movement speed for us and our summons. We also get to choose the archery fighting style, increasing our ranged attack rolls by a whopping 2, which may not seem like a lot, but I promise you it really is. As we get searching for a place to recuperate, we stumble across some fellow forest folk being set upon by gruesome goblins. So we jump into action to try and save the day, beginning with a Hunter's Mark and crossbow bolt on the closest goblin, taking them out instantly. Meanwhile, the enemies seem to much prefer missing their attacks, which is a-okay with me. Our crab familiar even gets in on the action too, bringing their prey low enough for us to take out with a bonus action so we can devote a full bolt for tougher foes. Unfortunately, our allies start going down at this point, but this only enrages our side, leading us to show absolutely no mercy, as now bodies on both teams are dropping fast. One more of our crew does go down, but at the very least we clean up quickly afterwards. Once inside, we get up to all sorts of things. We talk to some rats, convince some tieflings to protect their fellow refugees, learn to play every instrument ever in about 3 minutes flat, help a bird properly decorate his nest, save a child from a very clearly evil druid, and offer to deal with the local goblin problem in order to save the rest of the tieflings. After all of that, we head into the wilderness and bump into a villain befitting our warrior princess, a devil by the name of Raphael. He offers to fix our tadpole problem lickety-split, but Astrid has seen enough fairy tales play out to know not to trust him, so he buggers off and we go on our merry way, only to stumble into some absolute cultists who messed with an owl bear and found out the consequences. Either way, we tell the survivors to bugger off as well and go check to make sure the animal is alright. Indeed, she's got a piece of a spear still stuck inside alongside her, but she says she doesn't need any help, so we leave both her and her cub in peace. Our animal adventures ain't over yet, as now we find a lonesome dog with his recently deceased master. It turns out they were attacked by some gnolls nearby, and while we can't avenge him quite just yet, we do tell Scratch here to join us in camp when he's ready to move on. All of this grants us level 3, earning a third spell in the form of Jump alongside a third first level spell slot to go with it. More importantly, we get our Beastmaster subclass, giving us the Ranger's Companion feature, which lets us summon a bear, boar, raven, wolf, or spider once per short rest to help us out in combat. To start, they're not that great, but they get better the higher level we are, and as a side note, we also named them all individually, so check out the description for the full list of names. Continuing on, we find ourselves in a nearby village infested with goblins. They haven't spotted us yet, so we let our new spider get the jump on them. Unfortunately, it fails to hit at all, and we fail to finish off the goblin we target too, but thanks to the surprise round, we can still go for a web, as well as take out the now low health Gobbo. On their turns, only one of the goblins manages to hit our arachnid ally, but the misfest continues onto our side as well, only for our poor pal to get taken out a moment later. Somehow, Astrid seems to do better on her own, killing another one of them, but in retaliation, one starts just straight up shooting through the solid roof, while another breaks our concentration. So we whip out the elemental arrows to deal big damage, run away in order to make enemies struggle to reach us, and heal up with a potion. Still, we get shot, this time through a wall and a roof, and to make matters worse, he also taunts us by doing whatever the heck this is. We do manage to take out a booyag that's been bugging us, however, I think we need to accept that there is no avoiding this quantum goblin and his never-ending supply of fire arrows. At least we managed to defeat our nemesis a couple arrows later, and his sole remaining pal goes down swiftly too. After all that, we definitely need to take a rest, and the next morning, our newest friend Scratch decides to join us for good. Then we're back to exploring the village and finding yet more goblins, this time torturing a deep gnome. Thankfully, they're easy enough to intimidate into scampering away, and just like that, we free poor old Barkus Root here, who doesn't stick around for long since he's got an adventure of his own to go on. Further down the road, we find the entrance to the goblin camp. Thing is, they'll only let us in if we wear some warg dung. But I mean, hey, wouldn't be the first time we've lathered ourselves in dung in order to further a hunt. Now that we're actually allowed in, we start going just to get struck by a killer headache and hear the voice of the Absolute start talking about what are undoubtedly future hunts. Before we're overwhelmed, this handy-dandy artifact shows up to clear them away, alongside whoever this lady is. As nice as we're sure she is, we work best with just animals, so we tell her we'll be traveling solo. Inside the camp proper, we meet Grat the trader, who sells us the gloves of archery, increasing all of our ranged weapon attacks damage by 2, which isn't much, but every bit adds up. And now that we've made it all the way here, this strange skeleton man also shows up in our traveling home, letting us at last fix our ability scores to what they were actually intended to be. Back to the goblin camp, we also find the owlbear cub we met earlier, as it seems these goblins got the mama bear. But at the very least, we use our persuasive prowess to convince both the goblins and the cub that it's best the whippersnapper comes with us. Now Astrid has yet another animal joining us for our adventures. Speaking of bird brains in need of rescue, we also find the legendary author Volothamp imprisoned, so after taking out his guard, we free the old scamp and tell him to join the rest of our ever-growing horde. Once that's done, we get looking around every nook and cranny, and end up finding an entrance to the Underdark, where hopefully we can power up before taking on the goblins. While we're down here, we stumble across a boulette, which we admire from a very safe distance before continuing onwards, whereupon we find some fungal friends of the forest who welcome us into their colony as one of their own. And the first thing we do in here is talk to Dareth Bonecloak to buy the Caustic Band. This handy-dandy hand adornment grants all of our weapon attacks +2 acid damage, which once again isn't a lot, but with all of these little buffs, we are getting somewhere. Elsewhere nearby, we find a poisoned deep gnome who desperately needs an antidote. Our search for one leads us back to the Blighted Village, where in addition to the poison's cure, we find a group of mercenary ogres slavers working for the Absolute. A bit of convincing is all it takes for them to agree to fight for us with the false promise of 1,000 gold after the job is done, resulting in them giving us a bone horn to summon them that we can't help but feel was not ethically sourced. Upon giving the Deep Gnome an antidote, she tells us there's some Dwergar slavers across a lake that need their butts kicked, and she gives us the boost of speed stolen from them to help. With these boots, we gain the ability to dash as a bonus action, an extremely convenient thing to have when we mainly want to be shooting enemies from as far away as possible anyways. Deciding the goblin camp can wait, we head to the lake and bump into a Dwergar scouting party looking for the very boots we were just given. After a bit of convincing, they let us pass, telling us to go deliver the boots to their sergeant ourselves. Knowing the importance of a good set of hiking boots, Astrid doesn't really intend to hand away her newest bit of fantastic footwear, but certainly won't say no to a free ride across the lake. Once we make it across, we find that there's trouble in paradise for these poor slavers. Their absolutist leader has caused a rockfall, and worst of all, got himself stuck without paying these people. If you ask me, it seems like our prey has an exploitable weakness. But before our ranger can get setting her trap, first we hit level 4, granting us our very first feat, for which we take an ability improvement, bumping our dex up to 19 and a +4 modifier. In the process, making us better at most of what we do. Attacks, damage, initiative, saving throws, and AC all go up from this. Now it's time to get to work. We convince Elder Brithvar here that we want revenge on True Soul Nier just like him. All we need to do to get him on our side is knife the surveilling scrying eye. Or, well, throw it off a cliff, that's probably good enough too. After that, our next step is to blow up the cave-in and free Nier so we can shank him as one big group. Yet, as we're looking for explosives, instead we find some animals being abused and ready to strike back against their owners. Naturally, we decide to help them in the ensuing fight. Astrid starts her slaughter by shoving one of the sinful slavers off the edge, and shortly follows up by yeeting another one right after with the help of a strength elixir. Both our spider companion and one of the deep roads starts working away at the remaining Dwergar, who unfortunately takes out the first of our new friends before we can stop him. With just him left, our whole crew gets to focus fire on the lone Dwergar, leaving him to retaliate, this time thankfully on Astrid instead of our animals. Meaning it's nice and easy for us to clean up, freeing at least one of the animals in the process. Now that that's done, we gather up some explosives and at last pop open Nier's cave-in. Out comes sauntering the big man himself, who immediately cements himself as a petulant psycho by yeeting one of the slaves into the lava. Figuring it's better late than never, with that we send the signal to Brithvar to start our ambush. Kicking off the fight, we shove an enemy away so that we can shoot someone flanking us and skedaddle back to the exit of the room for safety. While the enemies start pouring bolt after bolt at our allies, one of said allies shoves the fellow we shoved earlier right into a magma pit. On our spider's turn, we shoot out a web that ignites immediately, presumably because of the lava that's 5 feet down, were I to guess. To make matters worse, one of our foes also mind controls someone on our side. Thankfully, Astrid is here to save the day with a hunter's mark followed up by a bow shot to break the concentration and set our pal free. And while we get ready to fall back further, even more allies join on our side. Unfortunately, Nier's ne'er-do-wells sure try and even the playing field regardless. Admittedly, they do a pretty good job too. Still, we're not too worried as we pepper folks from the back line, even if Brithvar insists on hurting himself against Nier's retaliatory legendary action. Our animal companion all the while continues to do nothing, and perhaps out of pity, so do the not-so-deadly Dwergars that we're facing. Eventually, the curse of misses is lifted as our spider bites the dust, but once the seal is broken, enemy after enemy starts going down like dominoes. Once most of his cruel cronies are out of the way, all it takes is a few shots to get rid of the big man too, and the last of them goes out right afterwards. Of course, before we let Brithvar go, first we intimidate him into freeing all the slaves. Can't leave a job half done after all. And look who we should find but Barkus Root, our friend from earlier who's off to Moonrise Towers, the cultist headquarters, to free a buddy of his. Since that gives us direction of where to go once we're done with the goblins, we tell him to join our ever-expanding posse back at camp. Then we head deeper into Grimforge, where we stumble across an armor mold as well as some animated armor just waiting waiting to get thrown into the lava. A good shove on another one, an even better throw on the third of these, and a well-placed arrow is all it takes to clean up the rest of them, letting our heroic huntress grab the mithril ore that they were guarding. Further in, we find the titular forge of this place and pop in both the mold as well as the ore we picked up. Lowering the platform, things start to feel a little bit off. Our animal instincts kick in and we decide to walk back up to the overlook. Sure enough, upon shooting the lava valve with our bow, Grim, a giant metal golem guardian, emerges ready to whoop the booty of anyone who's near. Joke's on him though, cause we're definitely not near. Once we've got the lava flowing and weakening Grim's defenses, we catch its attention and drag it into initiative. From here, we just pelt it with a returning pike that we found earlier, since whenever it lands on him it deals guaranteed crushing damage due to gravity. Eventually, the big fella's raging drags out the local magma methods, but we just take a step back and enjoy the show as Grim stomps them into dust. Then we're back to pelting it with the pike for a little bit until it's super low health, whereupon we switch to our bow to make sure we get the experience as crushing damage rarely rewards it. Our huntress takes an awfully efficient shortcut down to grab her trophies, which we make using the forge, the adamantine splint armor, and the adamantine shield. Both of these items give crit immunity, but the armor also reduces all damage we take by 2, and when we're hit in melee, our opponent gets sent reeling for 3 turns, meaning they have a -1 penalty to attacks for each turn remaining. Conveniently enough, our shield also grants 2 turns of reeling when they miss. Unfortunately, as powerful as these items are, they are not going to be long-term additions. We've already gone on quite the detour at this point, so what's a little bit more? Now that we're geared up, it's time to take out the disgusting perversions of nature that are the gnolls which killed Scratch's old master. The newborn gnolls that we find on the road go down lickety-split, and with a surprise round on their nearby friends, they're not too much of a challenge either. We even summoned the goodest boy himself to get in on the fun. With his brief assistance, this pack of gnolls never stood a sheep's chance in a tiger's den. All that's left of the gnolls are a horde of them that are pestering a couple of folks in a cave. Lucky for them, Astrid Fletcher and her pack are here to save the day. While they're surprised, our spider pal webs a few of them up. Scratch finishes the already injured one off, and we use a hunter's mark on their head honcho. Before anything else can happen, said honcho takes out our spider in return. We waste our turn missing an attack, and the only other member of our pack also gets got. We're far enough away at this point that the baddies can't catch up to us even with a dash, so on our turn we get a shoot at them and then use our boots of speed to maintain our kiting distance. Which of course means once again our foes can't reach us, so we give them something to chew on in the form of the ogre mercenaries we met earlier, and of course we keep the arrows and kiting going. For now, the enemies just ignore them and keep trying their hardest to chase poor Astrid, but no matter how fast they are, we are faster. We even have to slow down so we don't lose them. Then at last the ogres start wreaking havoc, causing every single enemy to turn and focus them, which is no skin off our teeth since judging from all the furs they're wearing, the ogres aren't exactly friends of the forest. Over the next few rounds, the ogres start putting in work, shoving folks off of cliffs, bashing them with clubs, and even casting some spells to melt them, and Astrid is no slouch with her bow either. The gnolls don't take it lying down though, and get their own retaliation on one of the ogres first, another one soon after, and they deal deadly damage to Lump, leaving him on 1 whole HP. For like 1 round, and then they brutalize him. Good riddance. Still, this leaves us with only 2 of the nasty gnolls left, and with our hypermobility, they stand no chance and join the corpse pile of nature defilers. The folks we saved from the gnolls are kind enough to invite us to their den for a drink, but when we arrive at the nearby inn, we find the whole place on fire. We're not a fan of civilization ruining the wilderness, but we're not gonna let people burn to death either. Once everyone is saved and the oxes are calmed down, we head into the nearby cave to group up with the fellas we met earlier. As soon as we enter, we get enough experience for level 5, where we get a whole host of upgrades. For starters, our proficiency bonus goes up to +3. We get a first level spell slot, 2 second level spell slots, and a new spell in the form of spike growth to go with it, mainly for area denial and taking out groups of enemies. We also get extra attack, letting us make an extra attack per turn, and all of our companions get improved stats and new abilities alongside Companion's Bond, which is a passive that grants our proficiency bonus to both their AC and damage rolls. A further reward comes from the vendor Brem in the form of the Titanstring Bow, a +1 longbow that has our strength mod in addition to our dexterity to the damage. Meaning so long as we have a hill giant strength elixir active, that's a +5 to all of our damage rolls, which for some reason also applies twice when we use special arrows, aka we just got way stronger. To put our strength to the test, we head to the goblin camp to get to work, starting by freeing this innocent bear kept prisoner. As the fight kicks off, we use our remaining shot to obliterate one of the goblins, and while the baddies run about, we get our improved boar to start raging. On our forest avenging archer's next turn, we continue our rampage, even taking out some of the goblin kids that are running for aid. Unfortunately, they get to safety anyways, and in comes more goblins to the blender. Astrid's companion at last gets in swinging range, but, well, at least he's tanky. And our hero herself is more than capable of doing some much needed damage. In retaliation though, the goblins start going after our poor bear, only for him to be revealed to be just some weird elf instead. Ugh. Now that we know he's capable of taking care of himself, we're feeling much less stressed about this whole situation. Even our boar is completely okay just tanking hits while occasionally dishing them out in return. Before you know it, our merry little team manages to work together and clean up the whole place easy peasy. Well, even if Halson here is disappointingly not a bear, at least he appreciates our efforts, and it turns out he's also heading to Moonrise, so we send him off to our camp to go join Barkus. Since we find a dagger that gives goblins disadvantage on attacking us in here, we also throw that on temporarily in preparation for the ensuing massacre. Then we get to taking out some war drums, picking off lone goblins here and there, and definitely did not accidentally shoot a torture victim, no siree. After that's all done, we get working on the main room with one of the leaders, Priestess Gut, still inside. It only takes a few good shots to snipe her. Being as powerful as we are, we're not really worried about the run-of-the-mill goblins after the fact, especially when they all have disadvantage on hitting us. We take a brief moment to convince the imprisoned giant spiders to join us in any ensuing battles and keep going, which is a great deal for both parties, as now we're fighting Dror Ragzlin and his cronies. Immediately we bait him outside where the spiders are waiting to get their revenge on him, alongside our Raven, who has a ranged attack that deals guaranteed damage and of course can fly way out of reach. A hunter's mark on the big fella is all it takes to make Miss Fletcher's damage go absolutely crazy, while he's far more concerned fighting the animals he once oppressed. Unfortunately, one of his goons is able to take out the first of them, and another lucky couple hits is enough to ground our Raven. But because it's a once per short rest ability, we can summon it right back into the fray. The second spider ain't going down without a fight either. 2 more shots on Dror is enough to reduce his HP down to 2. Realizing his own mortality, he uses his last turn to simply remove the spider from the face of reality. But nature is red of tooth and claw, and our bird shows is also occasionally vengeful. Without their big bad leader man to pose a threat, Ragzlin's remaining ragamuffins are quickly removed. We dispose of one more room full of goblins, as well as a scrying eye, leaving our final foe, Night Warden Minthara, all by her lonesome. She is a tad scary with her whole person that we managed to resist, but once that's done, we just pepper her full of holes as she desperately tries to chase us around a now abandoned goblin camp. Having completed our quest, we tell the tieflings the good news, and they throw us a little campfire party in the wilderness to celebrate. The next morning, we get scouring the areas we've missed, so we're fully prepared before heading to Moonrise, starting by swinging by an arcane tower in the Underdark and breaking a chair on the top floor to grab the Club of Hill Giant Strength. This neat little club sets our strength up to 19, which is not as good as a strength elixir, but if we ever want to use a different elixir, we'll be throwing this on. Continuing our Underdark cleaning, we clear up the beach from all the Dwergar we left behind, show the Myconids a trophy that we picked up along the way, and have yet another party. Then we find ourselves in a swamp on the surface, watching an argument go down between 2 young men and someone accused to be a hag. As if to confirm our suspicions, she disappears in a puff of smoke, presumably to get back to torturing these fellows' missing sister. A hag is bad news for nature all around, so we track her down to her cabin where we find the girl in question. Before we can rescue her, she's whisked away somewhere underground while Auntie Ethel reveals her grotesque true form. The old lady's garden gnomes also decide to sow carnage and stall us out. However, their best efforts barely take a moment of our time to deal with. An illusory fireplace hides the staircase downwards, where once we enter we find mind-controlled victims of Ethel. Putting them out of their misery is the least our fantastic Fletcher could do. Right after them, we jump past all of her deadly traps with the help of a Featherfall scroll, pop an invis potion, free Mayrina from her dangling cage, and shoot down a darkness arrow to hide in, before at last spooking an invisible Ethel, starting the fight. While we're hiding in a darkness cloud, her and her clones awkwardly shuffle about since they can't actually see us. So we just get into a routine of sniping the real one, and and then maintaining a darkness arrow to hide in. Rinse and repeat for a few rounds until eventually the helpless hag is reduced to under 30 HP, causing Ethel to realize her life is in danger, and not wanting to deal with the headache of reviving herself, she begs us to strike a bargain. She wants to leave with Mayrina and her life, in return giving us a +1 to any ability score. Obviously, we're not very happy about letting her leave, but if she's coming back anyways, we intimidate her into leaving us both the girl and the power. Just like that, our forest princess has squashed a child's fable in the works and gotten ourselves a 20 dex score. Mayrina doesn't really appreciate her chance to be in a parable getting ruined, but Astrid has saved enough helpless victims in the wilderness to know you don't always get thanks. As our hero's getting ready for bed later, this peculiar artifact we saw earlier shows up in our belongings, accompanying a voice in our heads. Since we can't get rid of it, we decide to just bring it with us. The next morning, we head out to the mountain pass, stumbling across Lady Esther, who tells us about some nearby Githyanki, and more importantly, sells us the Periapt of wound closure, which will be our go-to necklace for the foreseeable future that maximizes any healing we receive, including from potions, making our action economy that much better since we'll just have to heal ourselves less often. Further down the pass, we find ourselves just outside the Gith Creche and catch a glimpse of them corralling cultists. It seems we may be able to get answers from them. First, however, our huntress decides to scavenge these ruins for any natural resources, starting of course by clearing this place of all the drunk kobolds that have infested every nook and cranny. Notably, we find a rather peculiar mace on one of them that our instincts scream will be useful later. Elsewhere in this place, we even find a different ceremonial weapon to go alongside it. Everything clicks when we find a magical room with 1 ceremonial armament already in here and slots for 3 more. That means we've just got 1 more to find. Searching for it takes us up to the roof where we find it's a warhammer in the nest of a giant eagle. It does put a bit of a wrench in our curiosity, but we promise the eagle we won't mess with its nest. Instead, we just use a generic warhammer which works just fine alongside the rest of the ceremonial weapons to give us Morning Lord's Radiance for a 1d4 radiant damage boost to all of our attacks till we go to sleep next. A buff that will undoubtedly be useful as we make our way into the homes of the Gith, who are not exactly peaceful people. We need a hard roll to even convince them to let us through the door without murdering us. Once inside, we talk to a Jachnir Jira to buy the Knife of the Undermountain King. This will be one of our main weapons for a long time to come. It has the wonderful effect of expanding our crit range by 1 and also lets us reroll low damage rolls. Unfortunately, the Shadow Blade part of its ability is bugged and does nothing, but hey, the rest of it more than makes up for it. Feeling about as powerful as we could get, we decide to go chat with the Gith leader to swap information. He is certainly more than a little intense with his hellos. He's incredibly interested in our little artifact, but not as interested as his god queen Vlaakith, who shows up to take a peek at it as well. Turns out she really wants us to kill the person who's living inside it, and we certainly aren't a fan of the warlike Gith, but saying no to a god queen who could vaporize us with a thought is probably a bad idea. She leaves before we enter the prism and find ourselves in the astral plane, wherein we also find our dream visitor and the voice in our head, who's less than pleased to see us. Apparently, she's been the one preventing us from turning into a mind flayer, so in repayment, we agree to let her live and fight our way past the Gith waiting outside. She's kind enough to grant us a temporary bless as well to help with the fight, and since only an amateur woodsman walks into a trap willingly, we do a bit of prep ourselves, even granting our bear companion an elixir of vigilance. The moment we step outside, both Astrid and our bear say bottoms up and down a speed potion. Then our bear whiffs a blow to start the fight. Thankfully, he hits his second attack, which is Honeyed Paws, causing Inquisitor Wargaz to drop his weapon and triggers legendary action summoning a spectral weapon that's a real pain to deal with. Either way, we're able to pick up the greatsword to make sure he remains weaponless. Adding insult to injury, we cast Hunter's Mark on him and then put his bony booty to sleep with a drow poison laced arrow. Our second shot is an ice arrow to maximize our damage and give him a chance to slip on his turn, while our final shot is an arrow of many targets to start weakening the goons. Then we skedaddle outside and close the doors, which for some reason also causes one of the goons to start moving even though it's not their turn. Sure, whatever. And we have our bird familiar start being a nuisance. On the enemy's turns, they start dealing loads of damage relentlessly, bringing us way lower than we would like and even killing our familiar. A lucky crit when it's back to us brings Wargaz nice and low. A healing potion patches us up, one more arrow whiffs, and our final one takes him out, drastically turning the tides. Next, our bear disarms one more fellow, letting us once again pick up their weapon before we drop a speed potion on the ground right at our feet. Letting our bear break it, refresh refreshing its effects on Astrid since she was out of actions. Thankfully, most of the baddies waste their turns just slipping on the ice. Only one attack actually hits us and we knock that loser prone too. Back to us and we use another ice arrow to eliminate 2 at a time, with our remaining 2 attacks taking out a third Gith as well, before we top up our HP with a healing potion. The final remaining crony does manage to dispel our bear, which only angers Astrid, who knocks him out with the drow poison just to execute the sorry chump right after. Our rewards are twofold. The first is the strange conduit ring which we get from a chest. This makes it so that as long as we're concentrating on a spell like Hunter's Mark, we'll deal an extra d4 psychic damage with our weapons. Reward number 2 is level 6, which gives us Keeper of the Veil, letting us cast protection from evil and good once per long rest alongside Arcana proficiency. And also Wasteland Wanderer Poison, granting poison resistance permanently. It won't come up too often, but hey, it's better than not having any resistances. With the most dangerous game defeated, we teleport back to Grimforge and get heading towards the Shadowcurse lands, where Moonrise Towers and a once beautiful land in need of rejuvenation awaits. Thank you all so much for watching the start of the first run of 2025. This build was an absolute hoot to play, especially during the later levels, so stay tuned for that. And as always, a special thanks to our Storyteller tier members, Bunny Warren, Okan, Damon, Mark Rainbow, Vivian, Rat King, Lovely Velvet, Apricot Antlers, Lumina, Beltfed Joe, Chance Hine, Game Life Coaching, El Guardia, Cluck Vader, Cody Lumi, Spark, and Ramon Standalone.